The hearing officer would like to recognize Mr. Randall Hunt.
Thank you. My name is Randall W. Hunt, and I'm presenting these comments on behalf of Norfolk Southern Railway Company. I currently serve as Senior Director, Interline Services for Norfolk Southern. My responsibilities include acting as Norfolk Southern's NRPC Operations Officer and interacting with Amtrak on a daily basis with respect to our operational and contractual relationship. Norfolk Southern appreciates the opportunity to provide these comments on FRA's proposal concerning new metrics and standards. Norfolk Southern also plans to submit written comments in this docket fully addressing FRA's proposal. Today, my comments will focus on what Norfolk Southern believes is the single most important issue in this rulemaking: FRA's approach to Amtrak's existing public schedules. To put it plainly, all other considerations in this proceeding are secondary to FRA's proper resolution of schedules. FRA proposes to use 80% customer on-time performance as a single standard to evaluate passenger train performance. As the rulemaking rightly recognizes, where a train's on-time performance is measured against the train schedule provided to the public, the published train schedule, the train schedule must be aligned, or should be aligned rather, with the particular OTP measure used to evaluate the train's performance. However, the Association of American Railroads correctly points out that by choosing customer OTP, FRA admittedly has selected a metric and standard that is not aligned with Amtrak schedules. That is certainly true for Norfolk Southern in addition to the others from whom you have heard today. Nearly all of Amtrak's schedules on Norfolk Southern were formulated and implemented long before Amtrak began tracking consumer on-time performance. In fact, Amtrak only started publishing customer OTP data as part of its monthly report 2 years ago in early 2018. Rather, most of the Amtrak schedules on Norfolk Southern were designed, often more than a decade ago, to maximize endpoint OTP, with recovery time concentrated in the last segments of the route to minimize late arrival at each train's final destination. With that said, the challenges with existing schedules cannot be resolved through a simplistic redistribution of recovery time. As Norfolk Southern has demonstrated in filings and presentations to the Surface Transportation Board, among others, many of Amtrak's existing schedules are patently unrealistic, unreasonable, and unattainable. Amtrak does not take into account the operating and marketing conditions affecting the railroad, including infrastructure, capacity, traffic volumes, traffic mix, and maintenance needs when constructing their schedules. Further, Amtrak is unwilling to adjust the schedules in response to changes in these factors. Therefore, Amtrak schedules cannot possibly be expected to be realistic years or decades after they were first published. The point is illustrated by the long-distance services operating over Norfolk Southern. As an example, the schedule for the Capital Limited, which operates on Norfolk Southern between Pittsburgh and Chicago, has not changed since at least 2009. The same can be said for the Crescent service, which operates almost exclusively over Norfolk Southern from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans, and which has had a nearly identical scheduled run time today as it did more than a decade ago. Notwithstanding the known deficiencies with existing Amtrak schedules, the NPRM would not require published train schedule modifications prior to implementation. FRA assumes that the publication of this rule will likely result in revisions to some of Amtrak's published train schedules. However, Norfolk Southern's experience shows this is a faulty assumption. Amtrak was unwilling to revise its schedules on Norfolk Southern in response to the original metrics and standards promulgated in 2010, I had personally requested that Amtrak reconsider many of its current schedules on Norfolk Southern because Amtrak's own data shows that these schedules are not and cannot be consistently met. Amtrak has rejected those requests and refused to negotiate any substantive changes to their long-standing, unachievable schedules. Instead, Amtrak has frequently requested my consent to remove time from schedules, often on those same trains that are already performing well below the threshold this proposed rule would establish to trigger an investigation of on-time performance. In closing, Norfolk Southern urges the FRA to revise its NPRM to require either schedule revisions as a condition of implementation of the metrics and standards, or require evidence of the reasonableness of the existing schedule before host railroads are held to the new standards. It is important to note this reasonableness test would not require re-examination or elongation of all schedules on Norfolk Southern. In fact, several state-supported services, such as the Piedmont in North Carolina, have more recently developed reasonable schedules already in place. But application of any on-time performance metric to the unrealistic existing schedules of other services, such as the Crescent, would be a purely theoretical exercise that would inevitably force host railroads and Amtrak into costly and contentious investigations before the STB that would only reveal the same schedule issues to which I am speaking today. Norfolk Southern thanks the agency for their time and looks forward to supplementing these remarks in its written comments.
The hearing would like to recognize Andy Daly.
Hello, my name is Andy Daly. I am Senior Director of Passenger Operations for CSX Transportation. In my role, I oversee all passenger trains on CSX's network. I want to thank the FRA and this panel for their work on the rulemaking and taking the time today to allow for these comments. CSX hosts an average more than 40 Amtrak trains daily and more long-distance trains than any other railroad in the U.S. Like the other host railroads, Amtrak and CSX have an operating agreement that spells out the terms and conditions of Amtrak trains operating on CSX's network. Under the agreement, Amtrak's on-time performance is measured using departure and arrival times at mutually agreed-upon checkpoints. Amtrak's OTP performance on CSX over the past 2 years has been the best overall in CSX's history. Under the operating agreement, CSX on-time performance for the first quarter in 2020 was 94.6%, and for the month of March was 94%. CSX closed 2019 with 92.4% contract OTP. We are very proud of these results as they represent our hard-earned efforts and relentless focus on operation efficiency over the last 2 years. Amtrak and its customers significantly benefit from these results. Against this backdrop, I think anyone can understand why all of us at CSX are disappointed with the proposed rule. First, we had limited data capability to analyze the rule. Amtrak has not yet released reliable data at a level of detail that would allow us to perform a proper analysis. We only have Amtrak's A report, which has a disclaimer that it is preliminary, only intended for a trend analysis, and should not be used for outside reporting. Second, the results could not be more troubling. According to the A report, it appears that all but one CSX route would immediately violate the proposed rule, and our railroad could be subject to a multitude of Surface Transportation Board investigations, despite CSX's high on-time performance accomplishments. Based on what we know today, we believe these poor performance results on the customer OTP metric are driven by, first, schedules that are not aligned to measure customer OTP, and second, delays beyond CSX's control on multi-carrier routes. It also appears that other carriers are in the same boat. Shouldn't you train people say it also appears the other carriers are on the same train? It certainly could not be the intent of Congress to deem such an overwhelming number of Amtrak trains subject to STB investigation and to overload STB with such a potentially high number of investigative actions. Respectfully, we are worried the proposed rule simply passes the work of coming up with a practical and realistic standard to the STB at significant cost to host railroads, Amtrak, and the taxpaying public. As the preamble to the Notice of Public Rulemaking recommends, the Amtrak schedules will have to be overhauled in order to measure customer OTP. Schedules are not realistic and were not designed to measure customer OTP. Administrator Batory himself testified before Congress in 2019 and explained that there are some schedules that go back to 1960, and the world has significantly changed since then, including changes to track infrastructure, passenger and freight train flows, and demographic ridership shifts. The premise of the MPRM is that Amtrak will cooperatively work with a host railroad to align schedules to allow for customer measurement OTP. However, our experience is that Amtrak cooperation is limited because of competing motivations. For example, Amtrak is economically disincentivized to make the schedules more achievable. Federal law requires Amtrak operating agreements with host railroads provide for an incentive and penalty system for on-time performance. If schedules were to become more practical, then Amtrak may be required to pay the host railroad an increase in economic incentives, regardless of whether such improved OTP performance leads to increased ridership. Also, it's not clear why Amtrak would be willing to voluntarily remove its newfound leverage of taking a carrier to the STB, only to give up what it may perceive as its best tool to motivate performance, even if that performance is infeasible. The bottom line is that the proposed rule attempts to justify its rationale by unreasonably relying upon a doubtful future contingency, that host railroads and Amtrak will agree to updated schedules when competing motivations make these negotiations unlikely. For that reason, above all others, the rule is unworkable in its current state. The NPRM correctly recognizes that the Amtrak customer OTP metric fails to distinguish the individual performance of host railroads on multi-carrier routes. It further acknowledges that this is an important consideration, since most intercity routes are multi-carrier routes. For example, if there are two hosts in a route, and the first host consistently delivers an Amtrak train to the second host late, the customer OTP metric could trigger an STP investigation for both hosts included in the route. Therefore, the second host could be drawn into defending itself in a costly STP investigation despite adequate performance. A key shortcoming of the proposed rule is its failure to adopt individual performance on multi-carrier routes to the definition of OTP. Instead, the proposed rule appears to identify it as a separate delay metric that only becomes relevant later as part of the STB investigation. As mentioned earlier, another major issue with the use of customer OTP is data access and the uncertain reliability of that data. CSX requested the customer data shortly after the NPRM was published, but Amtrak has yet to provide any information. In addition, it is not clear how Amtrak's data can be accurate at each station, since there are cross-use agreements with commuter agencies that share routes with Amtrak, which could make station-specific ridership statistics inaccurate. As referenced earlier, we are forced to rely solely on the Amtrak A report, which Amtrak provides once per day on an aggregated per-route basis, not on a per-train basis. For routes that involve multiple railroads, the data does not separate out performance on a host railroad basis. It's hard to understand how this proposal can be advanced in light of the unavailability and uncertain reliability of the data underlying the customer OTP standard. In conclusion, CSX makes the following request. The proposed rule rightfully recognizes that customer schedules are not aligned with customer OTP. Therefore, to have any chance at being workable, the proposed rule must require a process under which Amtrak and host railroad schedules would be redesigned and mutually agreed upon prior to the commencement of any STB investigation. Customer OTP must not subject adequately performing railroads to unwarranted cost and burdens associated with STB investigations. Therefore, the new metric must connect its calculation and results to each individual railroad's performance on multi-carrier routes. Host railroads should be provided historic, detailed, train-level data on a station-by-station basis well in advance of the deadline for opening comments in this proceeding. Without such data, CSX and other hosts will be deprived of a meaningful opportunity to assess the proposed rule. Without modification that takes into account these and other considerations, the NPRM will fail to provide a workable rule with a meaningful measurement of on-time performance. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important topic. I appreciate your efforts to facilitate this ongoing dialogue.
The hearing would like to recognize Ray Chambers.
I'm Ray Chambers. I'm the president of the Association of Independent Private Rail Operators, or APRO. The companies are Herzog, First Transit, Keolis, and Transdev. Together, we operate significantly more passenger trains than Amtrak or any private enterprise in North America. Internationally, our four companies operate and maintain streetcars, commuter trains, intercity regional trains, and high-speed trains. On the average, our four members are carrying about 80 million commuter and intercity passengers each year on about 1 million trains in the United States. By far, the majority of passenger trains in America are run by entities other than Amtrak. As a result, APRO has strong interest in this Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM, that establishes minimum metrics and standards on intercity passenger trains. Our specific concern is that these rules do not create a statutory preference for Amtrak over commuter operations or intercity passenger service operated by other independent carriers by our independent carriers. We have studied the proposed rule. It is unclear as to its operational and financial impact on commuter trains and private sector operations. I am also quite taken with the testimony today. I believe that the concerns of the host railroads are legitimate and they need to be factored in before there's a final rule. And also, in spite of Mr. Jim Matthews' suggestions on beefing up the customer service side of it, we're going to have a more detailed analysis by June 1st. Now, in the commuter arena, where we have extensive experience, metrics and standards, including on-time performance, are always set by a contractual agreement between the authority, the operator, and the host railroad where applicable. I believe this has worked quite well, and we're going to submit that for the long term that this is a model that we should begin to be looking at. After a careful reading of the proposed rule, our interpretation is that it creates Amtrak Intercity Optics, OTP metrics. We don't have any particular objection to that, so long as the other challenges that were expressed today get worked out. However, also under the rule, it is clear that intercity operators and host railroads have the rights to petition the STB when service is deemed substandard. Therefore, it is our interpretation that the full application of the rule does not necessarily apply to state-supported routes or long-distance intercity routes that are run by independent operators under state authority for private operations. In these cases, varying contractual arrangements can be made, and in our view, that's a superior way to proceed. On-time performance is, in fact, a crucial factor across all intercity and commuter passenger operations. When rights-of-way are shared, maintaining freight throughput and velocity is also very much in the public interest. So we are in this mosaic of American railroading together. Amtrak is one operator, but there are a number of others, and it's time to move to the next level in our view. We suggest that the Federal Railroad Administration, FRA, and Federal Transit Administration, FTA, and the STB convene a seminar with freight and passenger stakeholders and address the total issue into how we can do this better. Because on the intercity side, it's not being done very well right now. Finally, the performance standards of the proposed rule seem generally reasonable. If the FRA determines our APRO interpretation above is correct, we have no objection to the rule. Although we would like the issues that were put on the table today further discussed before the rule is promulgated. If our interpretation is not correct, if there's impact on operators, independent operators, and also on commuter trains in general in ways that are not really clear yet, APRO would like a seat at the table, and we believe more needs to be done in determining just how this rule would work. Finally, we commend the FRA for taking on this difficult challenge. We believe the principles proposed are indeed a step forward, but in our view, it's time to look towards a more comprehensive solution in the problem of rights-of-way carrying intercity passenger trains, commuter trains, and freight trains. Thank you.